Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today we are looking at something really cool. I gotta say a huge thank you to my viewer, fellow knife enthusiast TJ at Compound Grind on Instagram. He sent this along for me to check out, and I've got to say it is an absolute joy to be able to just hold this knife and carry it and flick it and cut a few things with it. It's just fantastic. This is such a cool piece. And it's absolutely my pleasure, as I say, to be able to check this out and, of course, to share it with you guys who are watching. This is a very unique knife. Now, having said that, I will add that this is going to be difficult to review because it's so unique, right? There's not going to be dozens of these out there that just everybody can go and get, number one. And number two, being a custom knife, especially with the finishes and the choices that are on this one, it's going to be, you know, essentially some kind of combination between a tool and a piece of artwork. And it really is both of those things. And, you know, that makes it, again, something very different. Now, I will say this. I think probably most of you are familiar with the Razel design. It's been in production on a couple of CRKTs, both a folder and I think 2 fixed blades. If I'm not mistaken, there was a small fixed blade and a larger fixed blade. So, but it's also been around in a mid-tech version that was similar to this, but a little bit different, and then a smaller version that was also a mid-tech. So fair bit of, you know, there's a fair bit of knowledge of these, I think, out there in the world, and John Graham is fairly well known. So probably most of you have seen this, but you won't have seen a very detailed look, especially at this particular one, because there really, number one, aren't that many out there, and number two, you don't see a lot of videos or Instagram posts or anything like that about this knife. So I'm really happy to be able to share this with you. I will put a link to John Graham's website down below so that if you want to find something like this for yourself, that opportunity is there for you. I don't know what his books are like. I don't know what the wait time is like, nothing like that. So don't take that as me saying you can definitely get one. But if you're interested, at the very least, you can go and check out some of the other work that Graham has done and have the information that you would need to take that next step if you really just love this and feel like you have to have one. So now let's start off with the way we normally do these videos. We're going to start off with size and weight and how it carries in pocket, and then we'll talk about the blade and the handle and the action and all that good stuff. Okay, so overall, this knife is 8¼ inches, which is actually a little difficult to say. When you get this knife in hand, when you pick it up, it feels big and definitely does not feel like 8¼ inches. It feels bigger than that. The blade length is only 3¼ which is actually pretty short for an 8¼ inch knife. And then you've got this additional finger choil, which actually takes away more from the cutting edge, and that's an interesting choice. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I would probably appreciate the mid-tech a little bit more where the blade comes all the way back, or one of the other versions of these. There are a lot. I mean, if you search John Graham on Instagram, you can see there are tons and tons of variations of his work. So there are a few variations where there's no choil or a smaller choil, and I would probably appreciate that a little bit more. The handle length on this guy is 5 1/16 inches overall. And it weighs in at a fairly hefty 5.9 ounces. Now that is heavy for a production knife, but honestly, it's not very heavy at all for a custom. A lot of custom knives go well beyond that. And if you know my channel at all, if you know me at all and my carry preferences, you know that 5.9 ounces is not a big deal for me to carry. And so I really do have to say this carries very nicely in pocket. Now, while we're kind of talking about just the various introductory stuff here, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this knife. I have a suspicion in the back of my mind that it's going to be like either I love this and think it's the greatest thing ever, or I totally hate it. I know I've shown this to a number of people, and people tend to react strongly to it. Either they can't understand at all why anyone would want this, or they think it's the coolest thing and they feel like they should have one and they want to know, you know, what is it and where do you get one and that kind of thing. So I've got quite a range of reaction to this, and I expect that in the comments here as well, just because it's that kind of knife. Anytime you strike out and do something different, you're going to get a pretty strong reaction. So I want to kind of get that out there as well. And I really would love to hear your feedback and what you think of the knife down below in the comments. So let's go ahead and get started with this impressive blade. The steel here is CTS XHP. Come on, silly, focus. And look at what's been done with this blade. It is really, really impressive. So come on. We have a compound grind here. So we have a hollow grind up to here, and it's a very high hollow grind, really, really thin behind the edge back here. Sorry about the paint on my fingers. And then out here, it switches to a flat grind, which is going to make this tip a little more robust, a little stronger, especially if you're doing with this the kind of, scraping and stuff that this knife is designed to do. By the way, let me say that the owner, TJ, does use and carry this knife, and you'll see, even as you look at this blade, you can see that it's been used a little bit and probably been sharpened a time or two. So what do I think of this blade? Well, number one, I will say it's pretty interesting in terms of its overall look. I think it's an absolute work of art. I love the really dark acid stonewash on here as it contrasts with the satin. I also really like the compound grind, even though I do have one comment about it, and that is I feel like we already have a very short blade length, which is only 2 inches of cutting edge here. And now I'm reducing that further by going with the compound grind. I would have, if I was, commissioning this knife, gone with a hollow grind all the way out and then switched to the flat grind here. I also would have asked for a full blade rather than the choil here, even though I absolutely love finger choils, and from an ergonomic standpoint, this one works really well. It does take away a fair bit of blade length. Now, as I've been saying all along, it's difficult to apply those standard measurements to this knife because it's a custom piece that's going to, by its nature, do some things a little bit different. And so if you have the utility for, or if you have the desire to have that chisel ground front, or not chisel ground, I actually really dislike chisel grinds, but this Razel blade shape, then, you're going to make some other sacrifices as well. So do I like this blade? Absolutely. Have I cut some things with it and found it cuts really well? Yes, I have. I don't know if I mentioned it. The steel here is CTS XHP. I think I already said that, just in case. Anyway, there are a couple little tweaks there that I would like to see. But as I said, if I was commissioning a custom knife, I could have some variation there. And I didn't commission this one, okay? This is somebody else's knife. So that's my take on the blade. As I said, and the one last thing I will say is this. I do like, and I mentioned that if you're going to do a compound grind, I like to see the thicker tip because it's got that extra strength that I don't need so much down here at the base, all right? So having gotten all of that interesting blade stuff out of the way, I will say this, again, just look at it. It's an absolutely impressive blade without a doubt. Okay, let's move on now to lockup deployment action stuff. All right, so we've got a flipper deployed titanium frame lock. That is something we're fairly used to. It is on bearings, and I've got to say this, the thing that stands out to me most about this is everywhere that your fingers have to touch has kind of been thought through and made to be pretty comfortable. This works really well in a push button. It works really well with a light switch motion. The lock bar is really, really accessible. In fact, it just grabs your thumb. I don't think you could slip off this if you tried. And then down here, I like the way they've done the relief cut, and the lock bar tension seems to be set really, really well. For my purposes, I just tend to find myself push buttoning this knife a little more than light switching. I'm sure user to user that could vary. And of course, it would also vary depending on the design of the blade that you went with, and therefore the way that flipper looks when it comes out of the knife and the way it feels on your fingers. Overall, there's not as much to say about the action on this knife because it's just good. It's a fairly standard titanium frame lock action that you would expect from a high-end knife. It feels very smooth. It deploys very reliably. It's very comfortable. all the things that essentially you would expect if you were paying the kind of money that you have to pay to get a knife like this. All right, now what's truly interesting about this knife, at least as interesting as the blade, is the handle. And I've got to say, the bronze with that heavy stonewash and some grind lines or some finishing lines left in there is really, really cool. It's sort of got this steampunk feel to it. And there are a couple little details that I want to point out here that you may be missing. Number one, notice the lines here from the grinding, or from, looks like it's probably this has been done on a belt with a fairly heavy grit. And then we've got a bronze anodization and a heavy stonewash. And it just gives the knife a lot of depth and interest. You can also see that the milling lines have been left in some of those grooves, which again are adding just a touch of depth and visual interest to the knife. One of the things that's perhaps most impressive to me is as you look at the lock side, you can really see what's been done in terms of the anodization, and that heavy stonewash looks really, really cool. The one thing you guys may or may not be noticing that is really, really neat, I'm gonna see if I can show it to you. I think that may be the first time I've ever said neat in a video. I don't know if this is gonna work or not, guys. You can kind of see it here. So there's actually a slight contour to this handle. So instead of just being, you know, flat slab-sided titanium, it's just got this very nice contour that really makes it feel fantastic in hand. And I have to say this, the ergonomics on this knife are basically perfect. Like, it just feels amazing. The texturing on the titanium gives it just enough, you know, bite in hand that it gives a lot of confidence. The choil allows you to get up and do some fine detailed work with that chisel shaped blade, or even up here with the standard portion of the blade there. So I've got to say the handle is probably my favorite part of this knife. It's just absolutely impressive, the finishes that are on here. It is a zirconium backspacer, which is a cool touch as well. And then we haven't yet gotten to that clip. Now, when you look at that clip, I don't know about you, but my first thought was, is that going to work? Right? I was just like, I don't know about this, guys. I don't know if it's going to hang in your pocket the way it should. It is fantastic. It is way, way better than I anticipated. It's at least as good as any pocket clip I've ever tried. And honestly, because it's so inconspicuous, it's probably better. So I've got to say the clip is a total win. I would love to see this incorporated into some other knives. Please, somebody out there, you know, get in touch with John Graham and figure out what kind of deal you have to make to use this clip on other knives. It is such a cool clip, and it works so well that I really have to comment on how impressed I am, because I really did, you know, when I looked at it, I was like, eesh, is that going to work? But it truly, truly does. So there you go, guys. That's my discussion of the handle. We're starting to get a little long-winded here, and I knew that would happen because this knife just has a lot of stuff going on. But let me get to some comparisons. I don't have a lot of full custom knives. In fact, the customs that I have, I would call production customs, and I would kind of class this one as well. This is my Curtis F3. And I love this knife for a lot of the same reasons that I think someone would like this knife. I do prefer my Curtis a little bit more. If I had to pick one to keep forever, I would probably lean this way. But they are in a very similar vein. You know, these are designed to be used hard and to be just comfortable tank-like knives, and they both really, really are. They're great cutting tools. What else have we got here? Well, I think for the sake of, you know, just consistency, we should throw the Inkosi in there. That's definitely, you know, because people are so familiar with the Inkosi, that should give you an idea of size. What else have I got? Here is the Michael Ziba S2. Again, a really, really interesting, beautiful, beautiful knife that is, again, pretty heavy duty. I said with custom knives, guys, you get some heft, and that's been the case with just about all the knives I've shown you here. We have the Hinderer. Now, of all the knives that I have, I think this is actually the most similar. And the reason I think it's very similar is check out the ergonomics, check out the overall size. You know, we've got a Wharncliffe blade. If this blade just had, sort of a squared off tip, it would actually be a lot like the Razel. Now, the ergonomics on the Razel are better, and that's hard to even say, guys, because I love the ergonomics on my Hinderer. I've often made that comment. I love the fact that I can choke up. I love the blade shape on this, but I have to say that this is definitely more comfortable in hand. Not so, they're both very, very comfortable knives, but this one is just a little bit nicer. But certainly I could see someone who found this appealing could also find this pretty appealing. What else have I got? Oh yeah. Here is the Olamic Swish, which is not quite in the same vein, but it's certainly, a pretty high-end folder. And then finally, if you really love the idea of just this heavy-duty, overbuilt knife, then there is the Cold Steel Formax for you. And there's a knife, again, that'll really get some work done, but does have a fairly hefty price tag attached to it. Okay, so now that we've looked at all of those other knives, what are my overall thoughts on the John Graham Razel? Well, guys, this is an incredibly unique folder that is really able to be very different and very interesting while actually serving as a really, really useful tool. And so rarely do you see a change in a knife. Okay, there are lots of knives that are really different and interesting and doing something that's outside of the norm. Okay, but rarely do you see that change actually add a dimension of use. So this change with the Razel blade actually allows you to do, scraping type tasks with this knife and do them very effectively. And that's a change that I really, really like. And so, well, there were some things about this knife that I didn't absolutely love, including the blade length and the way this whole thing kind of works out here. I have to say, I love the fact that Razels exist in the knife world. I love this blade shape overall, just because it's different, but it's different with a purpose. Okay. And so that, I think, is an important important aspect to pick up here. I do want to say a huge thank you again to TJ for sending this along. And I want to say that it has been absolutely incredible to get to handle this knife, to share it with you guys. I hope that you're enjoying this as much as I am, because, I rarely get to check out a knife like this. And so I really, really enjoy being able to share it with you guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.